In the middle of a field in County Clare stand the remains of an early Christian monastery. Dysart O'Day was founded by Saint Tola in the early 700s. The Romanesque church ruins that we see today date mostly from the 12th century, including the church's most interesting feature, its intricately carved doorway. The columns on either side, decorated with Celtic knotwork and other motifs, are surmounted by 4 concentric arches, the outermost of which is made up of a series of carved heads. Dysart is the Irish word for desert, and in the case of Dysart O'Day, it is almost certainly a reference to the early Christian tradition in the Middle East and North Africa, where holy men would go off into the desert to live a life of prayer and solitude. There are no real deserts in Ireland, but the founders of this monastery were no doubt seeking to emulate that example in spiritual terms, making Dysart O'Day a place set apart from the world. In a field to the east of the church building stands a fine high cross, which also dates to the 12th century. The west face and the narrower sides of the cross are decorated with knotwork and geometric patterns. The east face of the cross contains an effigy of a bishop, perhaps the monastery founder, Saint Tola, surmounted by a crucifixion scene. The ivy-covered ruins of Killinaboy Church have 2 distinctive features. First, if you look carefully, you can make out a double-armed cross set into the stonework on the west gable end. The other interesting aspect is a shillinagig, positioned above a doorway in the south wall. A shillinagig is a statue of a female figure, often in a fairly vulgar pose, intended as a warning for young men to avoid sexual temptation. A few miles further north, we enter the Burren. This harsh, unforgiving region is virtually covered with a pavement of ancient limestone, which over the ages has gradually eroded into a distinctive pattern of cracks and crevices. Amazingly, it is not a barren landscape. Grasses, shrubs, and even colorful wildflowers grow up between the rocks. Not only flowers, but just as remarkably, people also lived in this region, and did so for millennia, as evidenced by some ancient tombs, and more recently, the ruins of this 15th century church. As we exit the Burren to the north, we come upon the ruins of Corcomroe. The abbey was given the name St. Mary of the Fertile Rock, a particularly appropriate appellation given that the abbey was situated in lush green fields at the edge of the rocky Burren terrain. Founded in 1182, the abbey flourished for well over 400 years before gradually deteriorating into the picturesque ruins that we see today. At the southwestern tip of County Clare is a peninsula known as Loophead. The Cliffs of Moher further north are a better-known tourist destination, but Loophead is just as dramatic and far less visited by tourists. Colorful wildflowers adorn the tops of the cliffs, where you can walk right up to the edge to enjoy the view. A narrow, winding road follows the coastline, making it easy to hop out and enjoy many stunning vistas along the way. On the opposite side of the road, these cows found us to be a bit of a curiosity. But we were soon back marveling at the scenery, and even enjoyed a clifftop picnic lunch. On the outskirts of the village of Adair stands an Augustinian friary known as Black Abbey. Founded in 1316, it now serves as an Anglican parish church and school. When King John visited Limerick in the year 1210, he recognized the strategic importance of the city and ordered that a castle immediately be built on the banks of the Shannon River. 700 years later, King John's Castle remains the most recognizable landmark in Limerick. Among the most interesting aspects of a visit to the castle are the archaeological excavations underground, where the foundation stones have been carefully numbered as part of the restoration process. Here also were discovered the remains of a village that predates the castle. Preserved beneath the fortress were the timber plank walls and clay floor of this house. And beneath this wall, the archaeologists discovered one of the tunnels that were dug by the troops of William of Orange when he laid siege to the castle centuries ago. Man has been living around the shores of Lough Gur for 5,000 years. For example, that outcropping of trees on the opposite side of the lake is not a natural phenomenon. It's a man-made island, or crannog, created by the ancient inhabitants as their home, using the surrounding water as protection against enemies. Nearby is more evidence of ancient civilization. This stone circle was probably used for some ceremonial purpose. And in the fields shared today by these horses, we find yet another piece of evidence of man's prehistoric presence in this area. From this vantage point, this might appear to be just a pile of rocks, but it is in fact an ancient tomb. Here, we can see more clearly how these massive boulders were carefully positioned atop one another, creating a hollowed-out space underneath, where the bodies of some tribal leaders or perhaps a prominent family were laid to rest millennia ago. Not far away, at another part of the lake, are some far more recent remains, though to us they still seem very old. The ruins of this medieval church testify to the ultimate conversion of the local inhabitants to the Christian faith. On the top of a hill near the village of Ardpatrick are some early church remains surrounded by a cemetery. The ruins themselves aren't particularly impressive, but their location is, situated high on a hill overlooking the Irish countryside. We had to hike the better part of a mile up a steep path through cow pastures to reach the site, but were rewarded with views that seemed to go on forever. The town of Kilmallock boasts several interesting and historic sites. Collegiate Church dates back to the 13th century, although its round tower may well have belonged to an even earlier monastery on this site. Back in the town, we find the remains of this 15th century castle, perched right in the middle of Main Street. But probably the most beautiful sight of all in Kilmallock is the town's Dominican Friary. Founded in 1291, much of the architecture that we see is from that period or the several decades that followed. The town's name, Kilmallock, means Church of Mallock, a reference to the early Christian holy man who founded an abbey here in the 7th century. Gradually, the town grew up around the abbey as it developed into an important center of trade and religion. Today's peaceful ruins give little indication of just how busy a place this once was. But centuries ago, Kilmallock was in fact the 3rd largest town in all of Ireland, after Dublin and Kilkenny. It was also in Kilmallock that we found our favorite B&B of the entire trip. Diebert House is a lovingly restored Georgian home. Pam was delighted to discover the window seat in our room overlooking the gardens. By the time we arrived, it had started to rain, but we didn't mind. The raindrops made interesting patterns in the fountain outside our window. And the cows in the adjoining field didn't seem to mind the rain much either. In the middle of the home's grand staircase, a large window overlooked the picturesque ruins of an old barn. After enjoying a picnic lunch in a park overlooking an old mill in Bruree, it was on to another mill town. In the village of Croom, standing beside the Meg River, is a restored granary from the 1800s. Unfortunately, the mill was closed for repairs on the day we visited, but at least we could still see the water wheel in action. Here we can see the small wheel set inside the larger one, greatly increasing the rotation speed of the drive shaft, which operates the machinery inside the mill. The large stone granary building itself is now home to shops and a fine restaurant overlooking the river. Just on the other side of the bridge are the remains of another mill, but instead of being restored, these have been allowed to decay into a picturesque riverside ruin. Just a couple miles east, near the village of Monaster, we found these abbey ruins. This Cistercian monastery dates back to 1170. On our final night in Ireland, we stayed at an old historic B&B in O'Brien's Bridge. Our room had windows overlooking the Shannon River, a fitting end to our trip. While our transatlantic flight was of course on a much larger jet, our final leg from Toronto to Grand Rapids was on a tiny propeller plane. Pam passed the time working on her beaded jewelry as she had throughout the trip. Before long, we would be home again in Michigan.